Delacroix's brother had lived in Tours, and the exhibition was of landscapes taken from the pages of a sketchbook the artist had kept during one of his many visits to the region. We were curious to see if any might be recognizable from the localities of our own frequent walks. The drawings, some of them scribbled over with notations about color and composition, were wonderful to see, but I confess it was really another work that I remember most. Located in one of the upper rooms of the palace, it occupied 2/3 of a great space of wall and depicted a boy, perhaps 8 or 10 years old, in a desert waste, his arms encircling a young woman, her head buried in her hands in a gesture of despair. The title engraved on the plaque was Hagar and Ishmael. I was deeply moved by the young mother and her child in their cruel and desolate exile, and I stood staring at the painting for a long time, trying to understand why I felt such empathy. Maybe all men at one time or another have been little boys futilely trying to protect their mothers from the desert of sorrow. Maybe it was just me trying to protect my own mother from the exile of life's ending. On the way back to the station, we ran into Letty and Mona scrutinizing old boxes in a shop on the Rue des Antiquités. Mona happily opened her bags to show us her prized purchases. Some exotic-looking lingerie and a pair of thick-soled, wedgie-like shoes with multicolored spaghetti straps across the toe and instep. Her husband, Mackie, and their son, Rory, were arriving in a few days, and I said, if you're planning on making Mackie crazy when he gets here, that outfit ought to do it. It certainly worked for the shop owner, who, overhearing the conversation and eyeing the lingerie, grinned from ear to ear and exclaimed, "Ooh la la!" "See that?" Mona reproached. "Now here's another place in France I can never go back to again." We arrived back in 7 years in time for the plate du jour at the Marina Cafe. Whenever we stopped there for a little lunch, the food was exceptional. The Marina was becoming a favorite place. Again, the lunch was first class, and the cook, when she had brought our food, seemed pleased and perhaps a little surprised that I had recognized the mix of vegetables as ratatouille. I found myself comparing the food here with the more expensive inn down the road where we had eaten yesterday. When you eat at a small, inexpensive cafe and the food is okay, it's acceptable. If, on the other hand, you go out and spend a little more for a meal and it's just okay, it's a disappointment. However, when the food in the small cafe turns out to be more than you expected, you really have a prize. Such was the case with the Marina Cafe. When Madame la Cuisinière brought dessert, she also brought her grandson to meet us. He was probably about 3 years old, with thick hair the color of licorice and eyes so dark and seductive you could not help but melt. Following his grandmama's directions, he held out his hand to each of us in turn and, bowing slightly, said, "Bonjour, monsieur. Bonjour, madame," executing each gesture in a most gentlemanly manner. His grandma, like grandmothers everywhere, beamed with pride at the effect of her tutelage. We were entirely captivated. The rest of the afternoon was spent quietly. Jack was reading, Letty and Mona had gone off to the river to paint again, and I walked down to the little market in town. I have to admit, I like food shopping almost as much as I like food cooking. Dinner. Turkey cutlets stuffed with a mushroom pilaf and a white wine and sorrel cream sauce. Fresh tomatoes and a basil dressing. Chocolate mango ice cream. Turkey cutlets were both delicious and the least expensive cut of meat. Fowl, actually. And always within the budget. Fortunately, none of us ever tired of them. The trick is to make the turkey taste different each time you cook it. This evening I stuffed the cutlets with a mushroom pilaf and baked them in a fresh sorrel and white wine cream sauce. First, I heated up the frying pan with a few tablespoons of olive oil, adding a couple cups of uncooked rice to it to brown. It's important to move the rice around either with a spoon or by shaking the pan while it's frying so that it doesn't burn. While the rice was browning, I set 3 cups of water to boil with a half cup of butter and chopped up about a cup each of fennel, onions, and red pepper. When the water was boiling, I poured it over the rice. It really sizzles up when you do this, so you have to add it gradually. Then I added the chopped vegetables along with 2 cups of mushrooms. I seasoned it all with salt, pepper, garlic, and fresh rosemary. Turned the heat down and let it simmer until the rice had cooked. I laid out the cutlets and divided the rice mixture evenly among them, then rolled them up and put them into the clay baking dish. I poured a couple of cups of dry white wine in the dish, making certain the cutlets were covered, then sealed up the dish with aluminum foil and put it into a 400-degree Fahrenheit oven. After about 45 minutes, I removed the cutlets, drained the juices into a saucepan, added 2 cups of light cream and a bunch of chopped sorrel, salt and pepper, a little flour for thickening, and simmered the sauce until it was rich and creamy. I then poured the sauce over the cutlets and served them alongside a salad of fresh tomatoes with a basil dressing. To our surprise, Madeline and Helmut appeared just as we were sitting down to eat. Helmut was ecstatic not to have missed dinner. The coast was admittedly beautiful, but it's nicer here, Madeline reported, explaining the decision to alter their original plan to stay overnight. They had brought me a bag of deliciously scented fennel salt from the salt flats of the Brittany coast and told us about the city of Saumur, which they had visited on their way home. It's just an incredibly beautiful place, Madeline enthused. Like a tiny hunk of Paris had been plunked down in the middle of nowhere. Finishing the last of the dessert, chocolate mango ice cream from the patisserie in Ballenmeyer, Helmut agreed. And you know what else? Madeline continued, directing her comments in particular to Mona and Letty. Lace. The sisters froze to attention, a flaring of the nostrils being just perceptible. We saw lace shops all over the place. How far is it? Mona asked. About a 2-hour ride from here, Madeline answered. 1 hour and 30 minutes, Helmut corrected. Is there a train? Letty asked. Not from 7 years, Helmut explained. You have to go into tours, but I figured it all out. The professional chauffeur had emerged once again. There's a train that stops in Langier, just south of here. We could drive to Langier, then take the train from there. Should we go then? Jack asked. Everyone thought that we should, and with Mac and Rory arriving in 2 days and Helmut and Madeline's engagement ceremony and dinner scheduled for Friday and their departure coming Sunday, we all agreed. Tomorrow, then. Wednesday, July 29th. That morning, the patisserie was offering a huge, lumpy-looking bread with a thick, dark crust. The lady wrapped it in white paper for me, and I carried it home in hungry expectation. It was absolutely delicious, but I was thankful I had a brilliant dentist. It was a tough, thick-crusted peasant wheat bread called pain de soleil, bread of the sun, that we ate with plum jam, butter, and lots of black coffee. After this scrumptious breakfast, the 6 of us piled into the car for the ride to Langier. Helmut and Letty in the front, the 4 of us jockeying into our regular positions in the back. Jack on one side with Mona squinched between his legs on the edge of the seat, me jammed into the other side, and Madeline riding side saddle on the hump in the center, my knee pressed into her back. Everybody comfortable? Helmut asked. We set off, driving southwest out of the village into a countryside of peach and apple orchards. At the tiny village of Lanier, a policeman stood at a crossroads directing traffic around a not-so-serious accident. Squinch down, Madeline, I directed, worried that he might pull us over for being overcrowded. If I squinch down any further, I'll be dragging my culottes on the road, she replied. Let's all look the other way, I suggested, and maybe he won't notice us. Just as we were about to pass, the policeman turned in the opposite direction and Helmut gunned past and around the corner, chauffeuring us safely away from a potentially annoying confrontation. The 15th century castle of Langier loomed high above the city like a dark sentinel, creating the strong sense of a place suspended in time as though nothing had changed in 500 years. In the town beneath, the narrow, busy streets were already filled with tourists. The train station might have been a remnant from the earliest days of rail travel. It seemed everything had remained unchanged. The wooden benches in the waiting room, the wrought iron covering the station master's cage, and the trim of stained and leaded glass of the windows were all intact. The station master himself looked as though he had been imported from another era. We took our places behind a young man engaged in lengthy negotiations, complicated by the difficulties the agent was having with the single glaring concession made to these latter days of the 20th century, an enormous computerized ticket machine. Following an intense exchange, the agent scrupulously pecked the young man's request into the contrivance. For some minutes, nothing appeared. Perhaps giving a suggestion, the young man said something more, and the agent pressed another key and, waiting, stared quizzically into the enormous screen for a response. Letty impatiently checked her watch with the time on the station clock. Finally, the tickets were printed out. The young man paid and sat down, adjusting earphones to his head for his CD player, and within moments began tapping out an erratic rhythm on the venerable bench. Continuing to stare into the blank screen as if trying to determine what had just occurred, the agent finally shook his head and greeted Letty. "Bonjour, madame." We were beginning to feel concerned that we might miss the train. Letty asked for 6 round-trip tickets, second class, on the next train to Saumur. The agent methodically repeated the same slow process, typing her request into the machine, waiting patiently in the silence for it to reply. At last, the 6 tickets were printed out. With less than 5 minutes before the train was to arrive, Helmut suddenly decided this would be a good time to buy tickets for their return trip to Paris on Sunday. "Helmut," Madeline pleaded, "we'll never get out of here." Ignoring her entreaties, Helmut told the man what he wanted. Again, the agent began the lengthy procedure. We could hear the sound of an approaching train in the distance. Fearing we would miss it and casting loyalty aside, the rest of us hurriedly crossed over the tracks where we waited, anxious that Helmut and Madeline might not join us in time. With moments to spare, the two of them emerged from the lobby as simultaneously the station master stepped out from his office by a side door. I could hear the train speeding toward us. Madeline and Helmut waved and were about to cross to our side when the ticket agent stepped before them with outstretched arms, blocking their way. "Restez ici," he told them calmly as the express train roared past at an incredible speed on the track they were just about to cross. In a state of shock, Madeline and Helmut realized they had narrowly missed becoming pâté. The ticket agent strolled away, calling back a serene "Bon voyage" as they crossed to us. Moments later, the train to Saumur arrived and we were safely on our way. On the outskirts of Langeais, Helmut pointed out a line of troglodyte dwellings he had seen with Madeline the day before, in the cliff face of the hillside overlooking the river. The mouths of the caves had been carefully fitted with stuccoed walls through which opened brightly painted doors and shuttered windows with gaudy flower boxes. There are many of these intriguing houses throughout the region, remaining after 1,000 years as human habitations, now with TV antennas bolted into the rock face and Fiats instead of primordial beasts harnessed outside. The train sped us on through the broad valley of the Loire, crossing from Touraine into the region of Anjou. Long before we had arrived in the city, the great Chateau de Saumur appeared as a distant eminence, seeming to overlook the great world in its entirety. There were few places in the beautiful vista, which had opened before us, that were undominated by this imposing landmark. The train station was located on the other side of the river. Once again, it was a glorious day with a soft, temperate breeze and high, cloudless sky, and we determined to hike across the long bridge that spans the Loire into Saumur. The city was as Madeline had described it. From the bridge, it appeared unified and compact, clearly bounded by the agrarian landscape through which the train had carried us. The beauty of its stone and the skill with which it had been worked to build the embankment, pavings, houses, and churches presided over by the great chateau created that extreme refinement of urban space that makes French cities so distinctive. I'm going to repeat that paragraph because it totally got past me. The city was as Madeline had described it. From the bridge, it appeared unified and compact, clearly bounded by the agrarian landscape through which the train had carried us. The beauty of its stone and the skill with which it had been worked to build the embankment, pavings, houses, and churches presided over by the great chateau created that extreme refinement of urban space that makes French cities so distinctive. By this time I was hungry again, and all for stopping at the first bistro we passed after the bridge. But Madeline and Helmut urged us on, directing us through the wonderful streets to a square dominated by the 12th century Church of St. Pierre and surrounded by a cluster of outdoor cafes. By this time I was starving and began salivating over a cafe sign offering the plat du jour, lapin. Hot dog, I thought. Rabbit for lunch. A couple of waiters stood outside gossiping under the shade of an awning. 6 personnes, s'il vous plaît, I said. One of the waiters lifted his arm and pointed to the watch on his wrist. Fermé. It was 2:05 by the clock in the steeple, but at a second cafe we could see there were people still ordering. The waiter waved us over, seated us, and announced the available choices. Sandwich hamon, croquet monsieur, or croquet madame. By this time we were just about sandwich hamboned out, so we all ordered the croquets. Whatever they might be, we thought at least it wouldn't be another ham sandwich. The waiter brought a couple carafes of red wine, and we all settled down for a leisurely lunch. To our great amusement, when the croques appeared, the monsieur turned out to be a ham sandwich, open-faced, but with toasted cheese. The madame was the same, but garnished with a fried egg. After lunch, Jack and I took the long walk up the hill to the chateau. The view from the castle was magnificent, with a complete command of the surrounding landscape and the Loire stretching for miles north and south. In the courtyard, we stopped to rest and watched a young boy, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, having what must have been the worst day of his young life. Whatever it was his parents and big sister wanted, he didn't. What had precipitated his fury must have occurred before our arrival. He was by this point beyond speech, wailing and stomping the cobbled paving. Maintaining a calm distance, his parents and the girl continued examining the different points of interest around the courtyard. Never far off, never out of his sight. Now and again his mother would attempt to coax him back into joining them. This only infuriated him more. From the entrance leading down into the dungeon, she called what might have seemed the final invitation at a point of departure. His tantrum suddenly exhausted, he relented, quieted himself, and begrudgingly trotted over to join them. Later, as we were making our way through the castle, we kept crossing paths. The little boy, being carried by his father now, was subdued but sullen still. What impressed me most about this scene was that no one, not in the courtyard or on the balconies or in the tower, seemed to mind. It was as though everyone understood what being 3 is and were willing to make the necessary allowances. At 5 o'clock, we met back at the square as planned, with time enough for a last cool drink before the 6:30 train back to Langeais. There we compared our purchases of the day. I had bought 2 little hand-blown cordial glasses I'd seen in the window of a shop we'd passed on our way back from the castle, and Madeline had found a sleeveless blouse nicely trimmed in lace. Letty and Mona had purchased antique kitchen curtains, but much to everyone's surprise, no lace. Exhausted from all the walking, the sisters splurged on a cab back across the river while the rest of us made a fast hike to the station. As wonderful as it is that all the trains are on time, if you're late, you've missed it. Luckily, we arrived with time to spare. Back at Langeais, we again stuffed ourselves into the little car and headed home to 7 years. Dinner. Turkey ragout in a white wine cream sauce, baby leek and avocado salad, pain de soleil, chocolate and cream caramel, vin rouge. I cut the leftover turkey from last night's dinner into small pieces, but put the pieces into a pot to cook with chopped red and green bell pepper, 2 medium sliced onions, the leftover sorrel cream sauce, another 2 cups of white wine mixed with a couple of tablespoons of flour, 3 or 4 carrots sliced thin to cook quickly, and a great handful of green beans, and simmered it into a creamy stew. Letty put together a salad of lettuce, ripe tomatoes, baby leeks from the garden, and an avocado with a dressing made of wine vinegar and a mix of olive and corn oil. We ate the last of the pain de soleil, drank a bottle of red wine, and relaxed after dinner with chocolate bars and creme caramel. Mackie and Rory would be arriving tomorrow. This was to be the first time we would all be together since our last dinner in the States. We're all excited about this reunion, and Mona was anxious to have a lovely dinner waiting for them. Maybe we should have a roast of some kind with potatoes and a rich gravy, I suggested. This will make 2 state occasions in a row, I continued. Don't forget Madeline and Helmut's engagement dinner on Friday.